Wow. Incredible first hour. Went over a few minutes there. I actually wanted to share with you guys on the stream a quote from Michael's presentation. This was one of the first presentations I saw of him where he was talking about the subversive use of sacred symbolism in the media, just to sort of highlight that aspect about symbolism and why it's important. And so I wrote this out. I'm going to throw this in the chat for you guys so you actually have it. Hold on. Put that in there for you. So what he says is that there are 240,000 miles of neural threads in the human brain, which is enough to stretch from the Earth to the moon. On every micrometer for these threads, there exist 250,000 units of information. But this data is recorded only as pictograms, only as composition images, and not as words. The phylogenetic race memory of our ancestors is recorded in the brain and in our DNA, in symbols and in composite images. This is the one reason why all religions, secret societies, ad agencies, political parties, and major corporations employ symbolic language or images. And I think that's incredible because what we're dealing with here, and this, again, a lot of people will automatically jump to the conclusion that all of the use of symbolism or all of these symbols are somehow in and of themselves corrupt or evil. I'm not sure why it won't copy in. I'll just have to add this onto the final version of the show. But the idea is that we're dealing with knowledge about just how the brain works, how we work as human beings, and that knowledge itself can be used for, again, we're applying a will. What kind of will are we applying? What's it being used for? And who's it benefiting? Who's it not benefiting? That's where it comes in. But it's all a tool. This knowledge is a tool. So this is why it's important to have shows like this where we're talking about all of this in context to how you can empower yourself, how you can unslave yourself, essentially. Because if the controllers, let's just give them that term, people that like to control, people that want to have slaves below them, they will use this knowledge, this science, this ancient knowledge that has been known by rulers of all civilizations and cultures for thousands of years. They will use it to maintain their power. And in order to maintain an unequal amount of power, they have to disempower you. So I just wanted to highlight that it's fascinating to know that this is built right into your biology, the way your brain operates. And it's a great example of the Hermetic science that Ryan and Michael have been breaking down about how it is this idea that the human being is this, it's this divine, I don't know what word you want to use, but here, I'll unmute you, Ryan, if you want to jump in. I'm just explaining this concept about symbols and why they have so much power over us and that they can be used to enslave your mind or they can be used to open your mind. And if you look at what we're getting in the media and even talking specifically now in our culture about words and terms and trying to change language, again, this is an example of how this can be used to shut down the mind, and it can actually cause a very negative effect in the culture. But on the reverse end of that, I think a lot of people stop there and they go, "Oh, look at that symbol. It's an evil symbol." It's like, no, it's a symbol, and the brain is interpreting it, and we're interpreting it, and it's being used for a particular reason. And if you realize that it's not the actual symbol that's the problem, but it's the interpretation of the symbol, that's the problem. That comes back to you as an individual and your ability when you become symbol literate or understanding of you're able to understand these things. You're not getting put under hypnosis. You're able to free yourself from that because when you watch these ads and you see these symbols everywhere, you now have the context that's been missing. But when you don't have that context, when you don't have symbol literacy, then they've got the hex on you. They can use that. Look at how cults work. It's just fascinating to look, because I think sometimes we zoom out and we think about the big picture of history and it's hard for people to think about it. So think of it like this. Think about a cult. Like some of these, I mean, we could identify cult behavior in so many different things that we've created, but think of a cult, like think of the Jim Jones cult or the all these different cults where people drink blood and do all this weird stuff. All right. What is that? Well, there's a need in the human being for some kind of connection to the divine, the spiritual nature of the universe. There's a need that we all have for religion or whatever you want to call it. So there are those who are very good at pulling you in, blinding you by the light, right? And bringing you in to the fold to become part of this herd of sheep that are going to be unquestioning, unthinking, uncritical. They're not symbolically literate. So they're at a disadvantage. It's kind of like a salesman that's trying to sell you snake oil. Like if it could be something completely worthless, and like big pharma or whatever, it's completely worthless. It's probably going to cause you more harm than good. But they know that you lack that internal knowledge. So the reason it sells is not just because they're selling it to you. It's because you're buying it. And the reason you're buying it is because you lack this knowledge. So when you gain the knowledge, you now are in a position of will. Until you get the knowledge, you actually don't have free will because you're not at the level where you're actually even capable of exercising it. It's kind of like a child that they can't determine on a daily basis what, I got to go to bed on time. I got to eat at a certain time. I better eat healthy food and not just candy or whatever. They're not there yet because they haven't matured yet. Well, I feel like the way that the control system was set up, using this knowledge in a negative sense, was banking on the fact that most people were completely gullible. They know they created a vacuum. There's a void that's there. They know you're going to try to desperately fill that void. So then they give you that toxic whatever to fill the void, when in fact it doesn't fill the void. It just leads you down this downward spiral. And now, we have the society that we're in: confusion, sickness, toxicity, and all of these different things. So that's why, and Mike, I don't know if you caught it, but I was just reading a quote that you had from your talk on symbolism you did so many years ago, and how they're using the sacred symbolism in media and even political parties and religious movements, and people even looking at the design of cities. They don't even understand that it's right in front of you. And I was just trying to break down how that doesn't mean the symbol itself is negative. It means that it's being used on ignorant people, which can have a negative effect. And they're banking on that. So that the whole point of unslaving yourself from that system is to become symbol literate, is to understand this hermetic knowledge that is being used for a negative purpose. But to remember that doesn't mean that the knowledge itself is somehow by itself evil, right?
No, that's a mistake. That's leading you down, in the completely wrong direction. But there's a wholesale feminization going on, and they're endorsing that. So they have had to find this mechanism of taking sacred things like the letter E or the phi ratio symbolism, which turns up, you just noticed it on your computer. I mean, they take this entire archive that once was for the uplift, the vertical, right? To take man from the hedonic level to the pneumatic, right? Meaning the spiritual. I said a million times that, look, the process by which Satan, sort of the soul, let's say, fell from paradise is the same road it takes back, right? So the thing is that they're using somewhat of that methodology. The same teachings that take the soul high are exactly the same ones that take you down. But the black, even that's inadequate, isn't it? But the kind of, because it's really white magic. This is the craziest thing of all. The thing that the sorcery that they're involved in is an art, and they've been initiated into it. When Ryan early spoke about how you could do something over a 400-year period, the sages in Egypt could. Yeah, but guess what? The Illuminati is doing exactly the same thing. So the principle is the same. They know that they can't exercise it in one man's lifetime, nor do they even really try. And also you might catch on, and the dumbass might awaken, right? Well, we can't have that. Fuck banging his spoon. No more obedient workers. We can't have that. So they watch the generational changes, right? You got to look through their eyes and see how these amazing plans are put into play. Like they wait for a generational change and then insert a particular plan that they never would have done on a 50, 60-year-old, you see? Right. And they've been doing it ever since. So there's so many, tools in their bag. And they know that, what was it I said before, and so architects that control that most people being spiritual would fly if there wasn't an imposition upon their spirit, right? So you take that weight off, automatically man questions, automatically man acts, or automatically one speaks, automatically one wants to paint pictures and write poetry and music and relax and have a breather for a minute. You ain't got no breather, right? There's no more Sunday. They've even noticed that historically the pulse of people was slower on a Sunday because after generations of having a day, one day, mind you, of rest, people actually went into a sort of I don't know if it was whatever state, delta state or whatever, beta state. Well, can't have that, so stick on some war films and some sports on a Sunday, right? Just to get man out of that. So they got motocross, and it's not I'm against the individual thing. I'm just looking at it from the broadest picture. They don't want you accessing the right brain, because right brain attributes meaning. They don't want you in a world of meaning. They want you in a world of letters and sounds and noise and purposes and ambitions and all the rest of it. They don't want you in a world of actual meaning, because that'll lead to things. Starts with meaning on the mundane level, and before you know it, some bigger processes are taking place. Now, in the idealism thing, I want to get to ask you guys about this. You see, the way I look at it is why symbolism? We talked about language being broken off from symbolism as a weird hybrid of symbolism, letters put together as words put together as sentences. But really, if you boil it all back at symbols, like I said, A and C and all the rest of it, these are symbols. Why symbolism? We haven't addressed that yet. So somebody would say, like I'm saying in the idealism series, there is the parts upon which we're immersed. Everywhere we look around us, we see parts. Particulars is the philosophical term. By living on this planet, and you were so right to talk about animal consciousness just before the break there, because animals also don't do what we're going to talk about now, or what I'm going to say. They don't quest a whole. They live perpetually in the parts. And you're right about even their concept of time. Having no thought of death, they don't have anything like the sense of temporality that we have, where we are aware that one day all of this ends, hence a very deep and profound relationship with time, but we don't want to get into that. Coming back to the point, the animal consciousness, and if we keep regressing, we'll be back there ourselves. We live amongst the things like a schizophrenic, right? Just living amongst, and we are. It's not even about schizophrenia. It's a fact of life. The most aberrant form of it is just things crowding under you. Schizophrenic is afraid of, a fucking matchstick, a lollipop stick. Everything has taken on a vast meaning, right? Like some bizarre surrealistic art. Everything looms and threatens, A lamppost is a frightening thing. A tree moving in the wind, schizophrenics, because the whole of the things, of the thingness of the world has crowded in upon them, just to illustrate it. But each and every person, without going that far, lives amongst all these particulars. But then the sage and the mystic, and I'll even include the religious man here, although with unwillingly, but you still have to include even the religious mind here. They start to intuit a whole, right? WHOLE. Because obviously if you've got all these parts, it implies in your imagination, in your metaphorical sense, that there's a totality or a totem, right, of it all. Or a being, as say Heidegger would have used it, and other philosophers, a being with a capital B. But the trouble with us then is that you can't actually put your hand, meaning your mind, on that whole. You merely intuit it. You merely surmise it. So, but man being what he is, different than an animal. And to me, this is the ultimate difference between animal and human. What I'm going to say now is that from a childhood, whether you're a mystic or not, implicitly or explicitly, the explicit, the mystic is doing that explicitly, but I think everyone, even from the back streets of a city, the total suburbanite is still on some level attempting this game, like the three blind men with the elephant, trying to intuit that whole and find out about it, right? The mystic is doing it openly and explicitly. That's why his attention to the things around him and his discourse with individual things is so much vaster than the ordinary hedonic man. But nevertheless, whether this whole exists or not, whether it's fantasy or just some human convention of the mind, which the materialist thinks it is, or it is an actual reality, we're searching for it. And for me, then, this is where language comes in, because language is a tool to intuit that whole, to not to intuit it, but to move further to maybe I can, circumscribe it. Symbolism was the earlier way of doing it, though, because the question is really about symbolism. So symbolism was one attempt, the right brain's attempt to intuit the whole. And language is another attempt. But I think language has failed. I may be wrong here, but I think that language hasn't been up to it, you see. So, we can then give language, we can say of language that it is definitely an organizing principle, right? It's helped us organize our thoughts, organize the world. Like I said, it crosses the barrier between self and other, because another is a mystery. When you meet a human being for the first time in that Hegelian master-slave sense, or even in a more sophisticated sense, there's a mystery about what somebody else is thinking and feeling. And so language was created, as I said, on one level to cross that bridge. We already talked about that, right? And then on the other level, this more profound level, I'm dealing with this in idealism, is that it is the means again of facilitating a very, very deep core need within the human being, which is to embrace, you see, and encapsulate and get a vision of the whole, whether that's even possible or not. Now, we've learned to give other terms to that whole, like spirit, like all, the all, right? Some might even say law, like you were hinting at earlier, that the Pythagoreans, right, and the Paracelsians, anyone who's dealing with number symbolism, anybody who's dealing with gematria, anybody who's dealing with sacred geometry, they realize that the all is a kind of a law. It's laid down laws and rules that every single life form on earth, even those particulars, must obey, right? But then the question arises still, then where does that law originate? If I say oxygen, there's a thing called oxygen, a thing called gravity, a thing called consciousness. It always begs the question, then what came before that thing? Now, symbolism is one way of articulating what that allness is, or that whole, or that totem, and also is language. So, maybe Ryan, you could first start what comes to mind when you think about that. Oh, you're muted, mate. I can't hear you. What's happened? I can't hear you.
Yeah, Ryan, you must have muted on your end. Try again. No, must have his mic must have got unplugged or something.
Is the input?
Yeah, because he's not. His input is live here on my end. Well, Ryan, if you can
David,
hear me,
go ahead. Why don't you?
Yeah, I'll get in there. I was just going to say to Ryan, if you want, best thing to do is to just log out of the call back in. Sometimes it just needs a refresh, and just make sure all your stuff's plugged in, because it should be good. But yeah, sorry, Michael, I had to jump out there, but you were talking more about this, how this is all used. What would you say? I have a question for you then, because I was reading this quote about how it actually works in the mind. You had a quote from this presentation. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Is it there?
Yeah, you're there. You can hear us?
Cool.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
But carry on, David. What were you saying?
Yeah, I read this quote about how you were talking about the fact that, there's all these neural threads in the human brain. It's incredible how much we have. In every micrometer exists these 250,000 units of information, and that information is not stored in words. It's actually pictograms. And we spoke about earlier about how the letters themselves, the numbers that we use, it's all pictograms. I wondered, in terms of what's happening right now with all this talk about even things like CERN. We spoke earlier about that word CERN. Well, CERN is investigating using the Higgs boson and all these different things. They're trying to, the Hadron Collider. They're trying to identify what's the nature of reality. And when you go to their website, they have a write-up about their mission statement, which is, we're trying to penetrate into the origins of reality. And CERN, you were talking about how that relates to in Hermeticism, in a philosophical sense, about this, how do we find out the nature of reality? But it seems like they're putting on top of this they're trying to put this whole new spin on it, which is leading us away, I think, from the true understanding of who we are and how we relate to reality. So have you guys looked into these new projects like CERN and what they're doing, and even what they're doing in technology, where they're essentially trying to build this new human being that is integrating with all these cybernetics and all of these things? What's the desire behind that, even on just a psychological level? Is it because of they've lost this knowledge, they're not connected to it? Is it an actual overt agenda, meaning the people that are behind this know exactly what they're doing, and they are trying to go in and corrupt the whole understanding in every human being about who they are and what the nature of reality is? Do you think the people in the project are they witting? Are they unwitting? Are they just lost? Have you thought about that?
Lost and toxic.
Yeah, if I can weigh in, I don't think they have the first clue of what reality is. And my barometer for that is looking at their language. And I'm not a scholar in their language. I don't understand their language very well. But when I do look at the language of, say, CERN, or like, say, modern mathematics, modern physics, I see it as being very dissonant, very cognitively dissonant. So I don't want to trust or believe that they have any awareness of truth. So I think that their agenda is just probably more along the lines of greed and control. And I think their language that they actually speak, publish, reflects that. And so,
and they co-opted the language that we're talking about. They've co-opted this mystical language.
But they don't understand. I don't think, and maybe Michael has much more research into this than I do, but I don't really think they understand what power language truly has. I think they just have gone astray and are speaking let's say a computer code, a binary type language, and they're going in a different path. And I'm going to read this quote real quick. Terence McKenna. It kind of falls in line because he mentions physics. He says, the world is syntactical in nature. This is what they don't teach you in schools of philosophy and physics, meaning the universe is made of words. They don't teach you that in school, that the universe is made of words. So, our description of the world is literally what generates our ideas. And our ideas, as we already understand now, our ideas can be manifested into the physical world, and then we can reflect upon them, right? So every idea, like this microphone, that's a reality, but it was an idea in someone's head. Now it's a reality. We use it, we reflect upon it, it affects our lives. We're able to do what we're doing right now. And so he goes on to say, there has to be a speaker and a hearer. Photons, quarks, and atoms are not what the universe is about. That is just a linguistic model that floats above the bedrock of syntactical concretedness. Mind travels through networks that itself interprets as meaningful. This is what's really going on. So to unpack that, I would say what's really going on is we as individuals are contributing moment by moment to reality through power of our speech. And the more creative and well-defined and articulated our ideas are, the more they will get spoken. And like Marduk, the great god, we sing the world, we sing order into the world of chaos. So each one of us has the power of our own speech that is uncensored, at least at this point in human history. I can't read your thoughts. So you have your own speech. You can't read my thoughts. So I have my own speech, and I can be as creative and imaginative and articulate as I can possibly be. And I can manifest that into the world. And each individual is doing that every day. And when we choose off of their menu, we're just buying their foreign installation, or we're just using their language. And so I think that they don't really understand the power of their own speech. I just think they happen to be going in a trajectory of philosophically, I guess it would be postmodernist, culturally relativistic, materialist as far as the physics world and science is concerned. And I think they just keep coming up against dead ends, and eventually it's going to lead nowhere. Their language is going to be a circle of gibberish, which I kind of already think it is. And there will be other human beings having conversations with meaning, that have meaning for each other as the biological species that we are. And we will be able to co-create and, let's say, move forward with the species, with the generation. So, I don't really know how nefarious they are. I do think they are nefarious, but I just think it has to do with power, control, money,
Well, it
greed.
operates like a religion, right? So it attracts people, I guess, and it's the same reason
Yep.
why you can't put every doctor or everybody that works for a pharmaceutical company in the, oh, they know what's going on. A lot of them are unwitting, and they go into it because they bought into the dogma the same way someone goes and becomes a Jehovah's Witness. You know what I mean? But then you'd think, well, who
Yep.
built that entire religion? Who knows how to pull people's consciousness into that so they buy into a lie?
Yeah, I guess when you look at advertising, you can't help but think that they do know what they're talking about, right? They do know how to pervert
Well,
the
somebody
symbols.
does for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if it's Bernays, Edward Bernays and that whole school of thought, people have, they're motivated to keep doing that to herd us as sheep. Like they hold the shepherd staff, and they're pushing us around, right? But I don't know. I mean, I'm a very strong advocate of the individual, right? Like once you realize the power that is divinely gifted to you by the universe itself, I don't see any reason why you have to be pushed around anymore, unless
Well, it's funny you were talking earlier, and thanks for reminding me about the question I had about it. Was you were speaking about the word dictate, and when you're dictating a language, or you're speaking, you're manifesting, you're creating something, you're dictating your thoughts instead of allowing someone else to dictate your thoughts. When we think of a dictator, we think of the Stalins, Adolf Hitlers, the Neros, whatever. We think of a dictator. Well, they're trying to dictate for others. They're trying to enslave and be masters over others. Whereas the only true morality is the idea that we've spoken on so many times, which is there is no master above, no slave below. I don't want to, because I'm on the path of dictating my own life and manifesting my own thoughts and connecting to nature and the divine and this life in my own way. I don't want to impose that on other people. Whereas these cult leaders and these dictators who are cult leaders are trying to create massive political cults or whatever social cults to follow them to do some objective or achieve some utopian society or whatever they're going to say. They are trying to, because of the fact they're trying to dictate that to other people, and they're willing to use coercion and force to do it, demonstrates that as individuals, they have no internal dictation, and they are probably being dictated to by God knows what and God knows who. So you can see it right away in the fact that they're trying to control, and you can identify these people in your own life. We've spoken so much about that with the whole idea of these psychic
sage
vampires.
and psychopath.
Sage and psychopath.
Yeah.
There you go. This brings all that into the fray as well.
Let me throw this quote right in here, which speaks to exactly that. It's Isha Schwaller de Lubeck in her book, The Opening of the Way. She says, in ancient Egypt, it was the same way that the first lines of the Gospel of John told man all that he needs to know to find his way. For when a man has recognized and proved upon himself that in the beginning of anything there is always the Word, that all things live by it, that its life is light, and that the gestation of light is in darkness, then he knows that his true aim is to awaken and bear this light in the darkness of his body until the resurrection is complete. So she's saying that at the beginning of anything that human beings do, anything, any action, even if it's just a thought, at the beginning of that action is going to be the Word. And that Word has to be eventually be taken responsibility for in the body and bared and in the darkness of the body. And she's speaking to that Hermetic principle that all seeds grow in darkness, and the human body is that darkness, right? It's the unconscious. She's referring to the underworld, right? This is where the Word has to go into and out of the underworld in order to be bared in the human body, and then eventually be resurrected, right, into the light, which means manifested. And so I take that as just a really poetic way of saying that everything that we've ever experienced and ever dreamt up and expressed has been expressed in words. Or if you're going to share it with someone, it's like, how are you going to share love, right? Like you could be in the same presence with someone and look them in the eye, and they will telepathically get your meme, like from your mind and heart, somehow magically implanted into their mind and heart. And if their dictionary matches your dictionary, then your meme will be in their head, and they'll go, oh, he or she is expressing that they love me. But if their dictionary is not wrong, if their dictionary is different than yours, it can totally get lost in translation. So this is the magic of language, is that like we're all actually practicing telepathy right now. It's like we're all in different locations. Our listeners are in different locations. I have a vocabulary and a dictionary, and you guys do too. And if we have enough matches, enough meaning in our words, and enough matches, our messages will go from my mind to your mind and back, and then to our listeners, and that the message will actually be computed or articulated correctly in them and in us. And that's magic. I mean, there's no, if that's not spiritual, nothing is, you know. And all that begins with the word.
Well, it begins with empathy. It doesn't begin with the word. It begins with empathy, because there has to be something that wants to cross the barrier. Then there's the means of doing that. So, so the symbolic canon, right, why we created it, and language are there to serve an empathic, like the pure Hegelian crossing between two alien, that starts off in a raw master slave, and then as it moves, it becomes more sophisticated. But I get what you're talking about, because say you, like I said, I used the word unconscious, and then it throws up all these images, not words. If you go to the bedrock that you're talking about, silence. Say we use that word silence, that's a word, right? And it has its denotative meaning, but it then has this connotative meaning in which you have the free will to take the word that's been used and abused, right? And then, but there's still an element of free will in your contemplation of it as a mantra, a yantra. So I say, I give an exercise to people. We're sitting down, we're going to all think about what the word silence means. You're out of determinism right there. The word is determined by whatever, the language creators or whatever. And this ties into the meaning of the sorcerers, why they're, what David asked about, why they're turned on to do what they do. Because they want to have everyone have that, you know, deterministic, reductive, highly defined, you know, meaning of yourself, your self-image and everything else. But again, coming back to the point, if you just say to somebody, we're going to think about the term unconscious, and then later, you know, we'll write down, very much as you said, Ryan, there's a consolidation point, and you revisit, you know, which creates a semblance of time. And then you say, well, here's what I had. Then you have everybody say, what came to your mind? That's free association. That's why kids should be brought up, you know, with this free association. But to answer David's question better is like this. My take on it is that these are sorcerers. They know the power of language. They don't want to be symbolic, so they're taking refuge in words, right? There's something in their own psychology that by going towards the symbolic, you're now a sage. You're moving into that pneumatic level, which they can't access. So it's like getting electric shocks from the fence. So they back off into the realm of language, which is safer. It's metaphorical, right? And anything that's metaphorical is buffered, right? You're not directly in contact with it. You think you do. You have the illusion. Must stress this. The left brain gives you the illusion of a concrete, solid, material reality. Of course, fucking bullshit, right? Like Ryan's saying, there's an ideal before the real. But to all intents and purposes, the scientist, the materialist types, is content with that vision of a hard, concrete, material world. Mathematics shows it doesn't exist. There are fucking colliders show it doesn't fucking exist. There are Heisenbergs, right? And David Bohm's, like you mentioned in the opening, stuck your head on it don't exist. The sages of the world have proved it doesn't exist, but fuck that. You know, we're going to say it does exist. Then we conceded that language has another good property, which is organizing. But in order to understand what's going on with the controllers and the advertisers, you got to see that they're signed off on any of the positive aspects of language. They take its power, they use the sorcery of it for deceptive purposes. It's a trickster again. They're disciples of Mercury, they're disciples of Hermes, but the dark side. the Dionysian side that says by way of these words, right? We have a Saruman, we have a C.S. Lewis, and you're quite right to say that, because in one of C.S. Lewis's books, at the end, all the power elite actually can't understand each other. And it looks like tape recorders, that are spun in Russian backwards. They're speaking to each other and it's just garbled stuff come out. The spirit has come to them and now they can't understand each other's language. And in one of his books, they all destroy themselves because actually they're listening, go, what are you talking about? And all they hear is monkey language coming out of each other's tongues. A fantastic comment in his work of what you've just said.
Yeah.
But the thing to remember, the thing to remember is one, and this final point about language and why they use it, is a psychologically inferior person who sets himself up to control other people, i.e. I can't rise high myself, but I can push you down there and I feel high, like everybody we've got running the show right now. Those people also are people who use language for one of its other great accepted, scientifically accepted, linguists know all about it, principles or capacities to push things away. The very thing that we've talked about the empathic, bringing towards, we've talked about the organization principle, we've talked that on a good day language is the disciple or the follower of symbolism, right? It's a kind of symbolism. That's all been giving it the positive slant, and there's other positive slants you can give it too. But we've failed to mention the negative, what we call objectification, right? Which is essentially, if taken to extremes, the pushing away of the particulars of the world, the pushing away of the world in order to sort of differentiate and alienate. That process of objectification, right, is often done by means of language. By naming a thing, when Adam names the animals, or we name things, it's another way of controlling that thing, right? It's another way of putting a frame around a thing. So that's from the neurotic, self, this traumatized, who needs everything in a one way named and circumscribed. So then do you see that the sorcerer is now a disciple of that more? He's not a sage, he's a psychopath, in which, because there's so much internal discombobulation, right, and chaos, the objectification serves a purpose of giving that kind of soul safety. And the naming and the use of language then in the hands of people like that is to not bring things towards you empathically, but to actually push things away so that you can objectify them. Therefore, they have less power over you. So this is where then I think the language comes in, and the wordsmiths as well. This is where they come in, because it's all born out of fear and anxiety and trauma.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because there's got to be something more to it than just, everybody tries to think about, well, what's the motivation behind these controllers, or what's the motivation behind these social engineers, these propagandists? How could they perpetrate such a crime against their own kind? And then you start to realize that they're not of the same kind in a psychological way. They're not thinking, they have disconnected themselves and are now putting up false idols, right? That's the whole story in the Bible or whatever. And it's not to be taken literally, to understand this in a psychological context, that there are false idols put up to worship. And this is why these big, powerful institutions, like even think of the way they made these churches, as beautiful as they might be architecturally. Michael, you made a comment a few shows back about how the whole cathedral is an archetypal image of the right brain. So when you walk into these massive structures that are so beautiful, and yes, they can inspire 100%. But if that's the place where you're going to be indoctrinated to completely abnegate yourself and walk away from the real path of spirituality, then that's the advertisement. And then when you look at how everything else is set up, look at the amount of money they put into these CERNs and the big pharma and the military and all these different things, the media. It has the appeal to the average person who's not switched on, that, wow, because of how flashy it is, because of how big it is, but how grand it is, I'm going to buy into it because it's impressive. It's impressive on a symbolic level and just on an archetypal level, but it's containing a lie. And so the lies are always sold with the biggest neon signs and the biggest bright lights to draw in those people who are basically gullible enough, who start out wanting to find some meaning in the world, but they're being sold a false meaning. They're being sold an inversion. They're being sold an illusion. And it's these people that then become the champions and go out and represent this fake, inauthentic system that can destroy an entire culture and an entire civilization. So that's where we find ourselves now. So that's why I feel like there's so much value in this conversation, And I'm sure we could keep going on and on. And Ryan, we're going to have you back for more of this, because there's so much value in understanding how it really should work. And that's the liberating process. That's the solution. People always want solutions. Well, here you go. Learn the tricks of the trade. Learn the real positive side of this. Don't just throw it out. Like, you hear so many Christian types or religious types. They're with you for so many steps, but then the minute you start talking about the Kybalion and the Hermetic schools and all this stuff, they're like, oh, that's all satanic. That's all evil. That's all paganism. That's all. And so they just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so it's sad that we've become so compartmentalized like this. But if you can zoom out and look at it eclectically in this way and be serious about it, I feel like, for me, I'm speaking for myself. And Ryan, you and I have had this conversation a few times, even off the air, about what was it that liberated you from the lie? What was it that brought you inspiration into your life? So maybe that would be a great question, just to get you to relate to the audience. All of this, what was it that drew you in, and how has it profoundly affected your life?
It's a big question. Well, I agree with what you just said. And first, I just, as usual, my hat's off to Unslaved. That's what you guys do. You guys have meaningful content, meaningful conversations, and just, we need more of it. So I appreciate being able to be here with you guys. One of the things that in general is liberating is this whole idea of being a whole, not being a part, right? So you were talking about compartmentalizing. So compartmentalizing is, let's just simplify that in words. It's like, oh, you're just a part of something. But if you take the word part and you reverse it, it's trap. So anytime that you see a word, yeah. So none of this in language is arbitrary. The human brain sees the world upside down and reversed, right? Dyslexia is not a bad thing, right? Dyslexia means bad lex, bad light. Dys means bad, right? Bad lexicon. That's dyslexia. That's another perversion of what's really going on. Dyslexia is normal. All human beings have this bicameral mind, right? Julian Jaynes' book on origins of consciousness and the bicameral mind shows our interrelation of the hemispheres and all that. So my point is that when you see things in part, you are inevitably trapped. So how do you see like a seer or a sage or a mystic? You have to be able to see the whole. And I don't really pretend to know how to do that, but I know the value of doing that because it happens to me sometimes. I don't actually even know exactly how it happens, but it happens to me sometimes. And I believe a lot of it has to do with my internal dialogue. And if I can get into silence, like Michael was talking about, or if I can stop my internal dialogue, the world changes when I come back. It's just a new world. But one thing I would like to jump onto about positive uses of language, because I'm not sure how much time we have left, is the Toltec. I've spoken about this once or twice before, but the Toltec teachings of the 3 types of language. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but the 3 types of language for the Toltec teachers. And the cool thing is they're teaching you types of language, right? Ways of syntactical approaches, or you could even say they're teaching you a mother tongue. They're not teaching you words. They're teaching you ways in which to use words. That's a mother tongue. And they would say there's 3 types of language that all human beings have access to. And the first one is the lowest, and every single human being does this naturally, automatically, simply because we're social beings. And that's the language of gossip, or also known as the language of the victim. And you'll find no matter where you go, no matter what language you speak, everybody knows how to speak this language. Like, oh, you talk about someone when they're not around. You say something bad to make yourself look good, like Michael was talking about. Every human absolutely has this built in simply because we're social creatures. And speaking in that type of language typically reflects a low self-esteem, a poor psychoepistemology, a lack of control of your own emotional and mental states, as well as a strong victimhood mentality. And I think our culture is embodying this to a great deal right now. And we need leaders, both male and female, to see this and step out and teach people how to approach a more meaningful type of speech. This type of language that the Toltecs talk about is the language of the warrior, which you guys are completely familiar with. That's what you guys are doing every single time you do this show. And David, you being a martial artist, I've talked to you personally, and just everything you say is warrior oriented, mentally, physically, you know, and psychologically. So the language of the warrior is defined by the fact that someone has become aware that this is a dream, that the waking world has dreamlike qualities. And the Toltecs would say that a lot of people don't see this because they have an idea, or they have a desire, or they want something, and it doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't manifest immediately. So they don't see that this is actually a dream type world that we live in when we're waking. But the warrior has a keener insight and a stronger awareness that maybe things don't happen immediately, or they don't manifest exactly the way that you envisioned them. But over time, when you put energy and thought and focus into something, it actually does manifest in the physical world. Like what do they say? The dominant thought you hold tends to manifest in the physical world. So you can't hold a thought without words. Like, try that. I think Heidegger talks about this. Like, you know, try to have a thought without words. It's, as far as I can tell, it's not possible. So whatever words you're speaking and whatever dominant words you're thinking is going to manifest in the physical world over time. And when you've woken up to that, you become more empowered, and you step into the responsibility of a warrior, because you realize that everything that you say is affecting your reality, whether you're saying it to yourself or whether you're actually speaking it in public. And again, Carlos Castaneda, one of my most favorite quotes of his is, we either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. And I think, okay,
yeah, that's
our subconscious, our inner talk, more than half of it, Jung would say, you know, most of it is coming out of the unconscious or the subconscious. So we're being fed all the time our own symbols that we've agreed to use, our own words, our own ideas, and our own thoughts, and they're being fed to us constantly out of the unconscious, and they are either making us miserable or they're making us strong. But the amount of energy that we put to making ourselves strong or making ourselves weak is the same. And once you realize that, you have no choice but to accept the language of the warrior and start to participate and use it. And once you know that you're affecting the dream, then you start to stalk yourself, and you start to monitor your own internal dialogue. And then you start to realize how that affects your actions. And then you start to realize how that affects your being, right? So if you have a high character person or a person of high action, they will have a more holistic way of being. And you'll also notice that they don't speak in mediocre terms, not because they're trying to pontificate or present themselves as anything greater than anybody else, but because they realize the futility of speaking to themselves as if they were a victim. They realize it never serves them. And then once you realize it never serves you to do that, then you're like, well, why should I encourage that in the people around me, or the people I love, or my social group, my friends and family? So you, in an involuntary way, if you're courteous, you're actually offering and enabling the people around you to speak in the language of the warrior as well. This is a really hard dance, is to try not to put forth any sort of psychic violence on them and like push people to do that. And in my younger days, I used to find myself doing that and getting a lot of resistance. Now I'm trying to learn that I really only can control my own internal dialogue. I don't have really any business controlling anybody else's. However, if I am impeccable, or if I'm just decent at speaking in the language of the warrior, my whole world is going to be better, right? And then moving on to the third type of language, which they would call the language of the master. And the language of the master are like truly holy people who have gone in and out of the language of the warrior and in and out of the language of gossip so many times that their awareness of their speech is so keen that they almost never speak in the language. They never speak in the victim or the language of gossip. And they may fall into the language of the warrior from time to time, but ultimately they speak truth, right? They won't speak at all if they can't manage to speak the truth. They will just be silent. And that type of language, I'm definitely haven't figured that one out yet, but the Toltecs are teaching that as a whole philosophy, a way in which to use your God-given gifts, self-reflective language and words. And I think if that were taught and held as a high value in any culture or society, that we would just be a better society. And that's why I'm so fascinated with language, because I've had my own internal dialogue affect my own healing in positive ways, and I'm still working on it every single day. Like I haven't mastered this yet, but I do know that it works.
It reminds me very much of Heidegger. You mentioned Heidegger, and he did distinguish between what he called chit chat, right, which is very similar to the Toltec, and Sprach, which is German for speech. And he distinguished between the two of those things. And he also emphasized the role of silence in this, Sprach, which is speech. But he said there's a lot of listening. There's a lot of, contemplation and silence involved in that as well. So that is totally reminding me of his work there. But if I could just say a last thing on something we spoke of in the very beginning, which is the difference between Gnosticism and Hermeticism, just to clear up that point. But it ties into a lot of things we've also said. And it very much ties in with David's question about why the controllers are controllers. In the pushing away of the world, that's an act of insensitivity, right? The sage is defined, or the master is defined by sensitivity. He's let the world speak to him because he's let it come in. Is part of the empathic thing. Remember I said that the Hegelian crossing the boundary is to let the other in. That's why criminals do better when they learn how to speak, because they're, without realizing it, they're letting the other in. And then you don't want to hurt that other. So this reading of the world is to let it come to you as well as you walking towards it. The materialist is walking towards it and pushing it away, going back, back, back. You're just this. You're just the clouds. You're just the world. You're just the sky. You're just a concept. Right. And so everything is demarcated. It's almost like a labeled, like you brand a fucking sheep, right, or cow, right? The sage is, like you said, the master's gone way beyond that. He lets the things articulate themselves to him. And so he's listening to the song of the world. But the issue is that I think the controller should be described as a Gnostic in the negative sense. We've talked about the negative sense of Hermeticism and Mercury and Hermes, and also of Gnosticism. Gnosticism in its worst is this pushing away of the world, right? The Gnostic believes this is a fallen world. Well, then why should you care about a fallen world, and why should you listen to it? It's a cage of your fucking soul. So what the fuck? So most religion is Gnostic. But here's the thing, whereas religion has lost its value towards people, the big brother controller has taken the place of that dogma, and that dogma is Gnosticism. So to really hone in here is that these controllers of the world, the power elite, are in fact Gnostics who hold the same view of reality as the Gnostic and as most religious dogmatists do, which is, and Alvin Boyd Kuhn is one of the greatest extrapolators on this nonsense. He calls it the mortification principle, right? We would know it also as asceticism coming out of the East. But it's infected the entire world, in which, why should I care about a world that's, fallen, it's controlled by some evil Rex Mundi? I'm looking for the pure something over there. Whereas the sage is saying, talk to me, I'm coming near to you, the world, in a phenomenological sense. Now, this pushing away, though, is, it's objectification. So we're all doing it. We have objectification where we have that space between us and the world, and I think that's healthy. But what I'm trying to say here is that the Hermeticist is the one who's with the world. He's not thinking of higher realms and supernatural anything. He's letting this world of its sacred geometry, its gematria, its symbols, its colors, he's alert to it. He's constant communion with it, and he's not abstracted from it, nor is he ascetic. Whereas the Gnostic is just, this place is terrible. You know, like the old Templar inscription in René de la Chateau, right? René de Chateau. This place is awful, you know, and I got to tolerate it. So while I do that, I decorate it. And I organize my room, and I tell you where to stand and move that over there, right? So there's a demiurgic principle here. And I would just say then that this is one of the, you know, very important differences. You know, there's a schism between a Hermeticist who's learning from nature, learning from the world, learning from other people, learning from the cosmos he finds himself in. That's why he uses the word cosmos. Right? Biosphere, physiosphere, you know, or sorry, physiosphere, biosphere, noosphere. He's containing it all. That's cosmos in one word. And he wants it to teach him and guide him and so on, like these Toltec leaders you're talking about, these mystics and shaman. It's all Aryan, it's Druidic. The Gnostic, though, is a controller type who has similarity. There's a certain crossover, but it becomes dirty and tarnished because, again, they're not being instructed by the world. They are boxing the world. They're forcing the world into certain mental patterns in ways that so many sages have pointed out. And one of the ways they do this is through language. So that the controllers and their misuse of language are really a form of Gnostic Luciferian types. If you know, you can come up with terms to describe them, but they're very Gnostic in the negative sense, in which the world is just a cage of the soul, a place you don't want to be in. You know, and while you're here, you don't have to be a good guest. You can just destroy and ransack and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Did you notice that that's pretty much the essential core to the whole flat Earth concept, by the way? Just so you know, if you get down to the bottom of it and you ask them what's the motives and you ask them why it's done and you get the whole thing, all you're getting is a repackaged form of this malignant Gnosticism. That's just been my reading of it. And I spent actually 9 months digging into it just to find out what was at the bottom of it. But and maybe I'm wrong, but that's
Good
just
point.
my impression. But there it is.
Good point. That's a very good
No, you're
point.
right.
Exactly.
I think you're right.
It comes back.
Yeah.
It comes back.
Uh-oh, I might have got muted here. Can you guys hear me?
No, you're good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing is, you know, the world, you know, being the Hermeticist being listening to the world and openly engaging with the world is just the word with an L in front of the D, right? It's the word in a cycle, in a basically a never-ending state of generation. That's the world. So, yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up and have defined the difference between the Gnostics and the Hermetic thinkers, because I never really knew that. I've read both and studied some Gnosticism, and I never put that together until now. So I appreciate that distinction.
Yeah, actually, that really
it's a very fine one
for me too.
It's a fine distinction, but it does exist. And the general way Gnosis is just, you know, knowledge, knowing things.
Right.
But there's a compartment. There's a non-empathic way, and there's the empathic way. And clearly, when you look into Gnosticism in the way Alvin Boyd Kuhn does, where there's a separation between grades of world, and we're way down here, you know, in a state of illusion. Yeah, they're in a fucking state of illusion. The Gnostic is in the state of illusion with that theory. The Hermeticist doesn't bother about supernatural realms or any of that nonsense. He knows it's a lie. He knows that the all is contained in the part, and he wants to tease it out, and he wants to communicate. But that requires an empathic communion, which language definitely serves a purpose. Just as it serves, you know, the controllers, so it also serves the sage. But it's an empathic one, that he's connecting to the word in an empathic, ultimately mystical way. And mysticism is not airy-fairy. It means being with the thing as it is in itself, phenomenologically in front of you, in the present.
Well, communion is the same word as communication. You have to be connected, right? Or you have to speak and listen, right? Yeah.
And that's why they take that word communism, and that becomes a corruption of that principle and makes everybody feel like, oh, this sounds brilliant. This sounds brilliant. You know, that sounds like exactly what we want to do, but that's the bait and switch.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have left. Have you
We're
guys
over time, but if you got, we can just say wrap it up in 5 minutes, if ever, that's cool.
just maybe for the listeners, it'd probably be way too much to talk about now, but for people who haven't ever heard of this guy, Stan Tenen, have you guys ever seen or seen his work, Stan Tenen?
Stan Tenen.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I probably can't really go into it right now with 5 minutes, but people listening should go YouTube him or buy his books. He was of the foundation called the Meru Foundation, but the stuff that I learned from him is the esoteric, same with Alvin Boyd Kuhn, the esoteric structure of the alphabet. And he took it to a step that was so intuitively correct for me when I saw it, is that, and he focused on the Hebrew alphabet primarily. And he showed that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet were not arbitrarily made. They were made through natural phenomenon, the way that the sun and or light would change the shadow when shined on a specific type of object over the course of a 12-hour day. I know that sounds kind of complicated, but shadows move through the time like a sundial. And what he extrapolated is this particular geometric shape that is phenomenal. One figured out how he got it, but it's basically a shape that it was extrapolated from an apple, right? And there's these very ancient symbols of the apple, right? This fruit, the fruit of life, right? Growing on the tree of knowledge or the tree of life. And so I can't really describe the shape without you seeing it, but it's something that fits in the palm of your hand, and it's extrapolated from the shape of an apple. And the way that he figured out that they created each letter, or 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, was by holding two of these objects that were created by a natural science in your hands, and each time you moved your hands with your body in a different direction, like you might have your hands behind your head, or you might have them right in front of your face, or you might have them pointed at your belly button, or you might have them arms outstretched. Every time you change the movement of your hands, these objects that are in your hands would look differently from your perspective holding them. And each one of these, he called them stations. There were 22 stations or 22 movements. And each time you would see these shapes in your hand, it actually became a letter. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's a natural harmonic of nature that designed the actual shape of the object. The shadows were the first thing that we sort of scribbled down, and then we refined those shadows by applying those. Okay, we had these etched symbols, but they weren't refined enough to work to give us enough multi-layered meaning. So we took those symbols, them into an actual form that you could hold in your hand, and then we danced with them. We literally moved our hands with our body, 22 different stations, to incorporate nature, our psyche, our emotional meaning or intent behind the symbols, as well as our temple, the body, all together as one. And that's the origin of the Hebrew alphabet. And you could also sort of say the alphabet in your hands, right? The alphabet on your hands. And Marty Leeds also does work on the English alphabet being connected to your body. And his book is called, I think it's called Pi in the English Alphabet. And why would he use pi, right? It's because all of this is connected to the anthropos, the macrocosm, microcosm. It's all connected to us, and our power as sentient beings.
The Indian Bharatanatyam dancing, and I'd say spinning dervishes, is all indicative of what you're talking about here. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's just endless when we get into the subject. I mean, this was fantastic. And as I'm reading the comments from our members, people are saying, man, my mind is blown. This is great. And they've also had some really good commentary in there. So I'm looking forward to see how this episode plays out, Ryan. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. You were breaking this down brilliantly. It really added some context. I learned a lot today, and I'm going to go back and revisit these notes. We'll put some links in the actual show once it's uploaded so people can go and research this for themselves as usual. And I also remember, Michael, you did a great deal of talk on this subject in the Path of the Fool. I mean, it was throughout Path of the Fool when you're breaking down the tarot, the ultimate archive of symbolism.
Yeah.
And someone was even asking, you know, is the tarot a language? I was just saying, well, it's from the archive of the original language, which was symbolism. So you can go, if you're curious about this, go and look at the Path of the Fool, and obviously also the Idealism. Go check out Ryan's work. And Ryan, do you have any new books coming out about this, or any new videos or anything like that?
Well, about language, the only thing I have about language is I have a talk. I'll send you a link that I did discussing a lot of this with slides. So it's really hard stuff to conceptualize without visuals. So
Right.
That's on my YouTube channel. I'll send you that. And then I did make a condensed version, which is just a compact disc that it's on Amazon, which is just a 50-minute talk talking about some of these key principles, but without models, to just remind people of how how powerful their inner talk is and their speech is. So I'll send you both those links. As far as books go, I'm still in a holding pattern on my third book. I was really hoping to have it done by now, but it doesn't deal with language really. But I'm just waiting on one more interview, and then I'll be able to wrap it up. So hopefully that'll be published soon.
Well, let us know. We'll definitely promote it, and we'll have you back when you've got that released or any new work. And yeah, thanks a lot for joining us today, man. It was great.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you guys. I appreciate. I learn just like you, David. I learn every time I listen to you guys. I learn, and every time I get a chance to actually bounce back and forth like this in a conversation, it really offers me different perspectives that I learn from. And then I just got to say one more thing. Your work with the Sage and the Psychopath is just phenomenal. Second to none. Both the first one and the second one. I think the second one, Michael, is like pretty much you, I think. But it's just phenomenal. You have such a good understanding of the way that the mind or psyche can be structured. It makes so much sense to me as a language, right? I mean, as a model. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I just, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, that was a good one. I enjoyed doing it. Thanks. I'm glad you watched it.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. And thank you all to our members. Stay tuned. We got some new updates coming. We're very close to being able to get our new site up. So thanks for bearing with us on that. It's going to be a really, really great system to work with. So we're very excited. So stay tuned for those announcements. We've got some great shows and fantastic guests coming your way. So stay tuned here at Unslaved. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.